last year, and there was also 3 other people in the region who also attended that training. And this year, this coming year, one of the primary things we want to do is introduce this manual to as many congregations as we can, and hopefully at least have a couple congregations that get seriously committed to implementing it, going through it, and trying to build some disciple-making groups within their own congregation. The manual came out of a lot of the training that the disciple guides went through last year, and a combination of materials from different congregations throughout the country, particularly the ones that participated at the national level. And this is their first, well, it's actually a second attempt. The first time they put together in a form, and we used it for our disciple guide training sessions last year, and following that session they gathered input from everybody who participated, and that's when they went ahead and produced the next one. The manual itself is available either through ordering it, and this is a printed copy which you can get for $40 direct from the NALC, or you can go online, you go onto the NALC website, and under the Life to Life section, you can download the manual. However, I'll caution you. We did that, and in the process of printing out the 282 pages, we killed our printer. So, in saving $40, it was not very good economics. The manual itself is just intended to be a resource. It's not intended to replace anything. It's just pulling a number of ideas together. And actually within the manual, they list a lot of other resources. I've got a list of reading that's going to take me another couple of years to read all of it, of subjects in there that I have not gone through, and I've probably read about 30 books on discipleship so far. The primary goal with discipleship, and this is how we've kind of developed it at our congregation and within the RDMT, is it's not intended to replace anything that the church is currently doing. It's really been kind of a supplement. We still have our Bible studies. We still have regular worship. We still encourage everybody to maintain a good and healthy personal devotion time. What we're trying to do is take believers and get them to the point where they feel confident that they can take what they've learned and better share it with others, so that we can take what the pastor's doing and multiply it, that we can actually create a disciple-making culture within the congregation. We can all be mutually supportive and help take our fellow believers and help move them to a higher level. And it's been a long, slow process, but we found that probably the most exciting thing is when you've been leading a small group, and then one of the members of the group that you've been working with starts their own small group. And that's exciting. I didn't think it was ever going to happen. And for the men yet at our congregation, it hasn't. The only one who started a group that other men have then started a group was our pastor, Luke Seaman. However, I've run a group, and we're getting close to starting another men's group, but it hasn't happened yet. The women have been a lot more successful at it. They've been more committed, they've been more involved, and they've had some pretty good results. I think one of the most interesting one is one of the women in our congregation has been meeting with 2 young mothers, both of which have 2 young sons. One has 2 young sons, the other has a young son and daughter. So while the woman was leading the group and with the other 2 women, they in turn took what they were learning and then passed it on to their children. And we wish we had had that kind of training when we were first starting out. We didn't spend that kind of time with our son. We let the pastor take care of that in confirmation, and when he went to Luther League or Sunday school groups, we kind of left that up to others to do it. And I wish we had been more involved in his actual day-to-day training. And it was really exciting to see that happen. I mentioned the fact that a lot of input came from various congregations all over the country. And I think to really understand the power of the information in there and how the group using it can build on it, I'd like to call on Pastor White, who has been involved in the process over a number of years, and let him share the experience he's had in the development of this, and as he's starting to see the impact in various parts of the country. And then I've got a few things to follow up on some coming events after Pastor White finishes talking. Thank you.
Great, Lee. Thank you. Yeah, 2 things I guess to say about it by way of introduction. One is from the experience that I've had, what we need to do if we're not doing it already in our congregations is get started. Just, we can evaluate and analyze all kinds of curriculum, and we can read tons of books and all this, but just what we're talking about in general terms, I don't, I haven't read tons and tons of books on it, but every discipleship training kind of curriculum program books that I've seen are all saying basically the same thing. And what it involves is creating small groups, have a small group where 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people meet regularly, ideally maybe once a week or at least every 2 weeks. And in that small group, relationships are developed and deepened. But you're developing those relationships around the Word of God. So you come together for Bible study and prayer, and by using some kind of an intentional disciple-making curriculum, in time, the participants become more comfortable and confident in their knowledge of the faith and their ability to share the faith. That we want to be intentional about, why don't people, Lutherans, why don't we talk about our faith more? Why don't we do evangelism more, or what have you? We can analyze that historically of how we ended up where we are, but the bottom line is, as I've asked adults, and I think if you surveyed adults, why people don't talk about their faith more, most of them are scared to death. They're going to be exposed for what they don't know, that they're going to be asked a question that they don't have the answer to. And so it's better to just avoid the topic than risk letting on how little I know about the faith, or be asked a question I don't know the answer to. Maybe I'll fail God or disappoint God because I didn't defend God properly or whatever. But y'all know what I'm talking about. Is that similar experiences out there? Anybody? Are you awake? No. Okay. Or did I put you to sleep earlier? Right. But no matter what you're using, what I've seen is you come together in a small group, gathered around an open Bible, around the Scriptures, and reading the Scriptures together. And as you're reading together, you are discussing what you're reading and discovering what God is saying to you here and now in present. Hey, this book is alive. God does speak to us now in the present. And in that sharing together in that context, we strive to apply it to our lives. And as we're meeting regularly, we can help pray for each other and hold each other accountable for trying to apply it to their lives. And we can celebrate the successes when people set goals for themselves, like I said, I guess yesterday at the Bible study thing. Maybe I I'm meeting with a small group, and I come to believe that my prayer life's not what it wants to be. I don't pray enough. I don't pray that often, and so in my small group, maybe well, what would you like to do about that? Would you like to try to do something about that? Yeah, I'd like to do something about that. Well, what do you want to do? Well, I know I need to pray more. Well, how might you be able to achieve that? Well, I guess I could try to set 10 minutes aside every morning. Maybe I'll try to get started. I'll try 3 days a week. Is that what you want to do? Yeah, I'm going to make a commitment to start praying 3 days a week for 10 minutes a day, first thing in the morning. Great. You come back together, in your little small group the next week. Hey, how'd that praying go? Oh man, I had to start off the week bad, and I got real busy, and I didn't do it all. Well, that's okay. We can encourage one. All right, but you sure it's something you want to do? Yeah, I still want to do that. Well, you want to give it another week. All right. Next week you come to how'd it go? Hey, I hit it, batted 1,000, 3 different mornings. I said, great. So I know that it's not rocket science, right? But God's Holy Spirit works in that to nurture faith and strengthen faith. And what happens over time is we become more comfortable and confident in talking about our faith. And with some kind of a disciple-making type curriculum, what the elements that are there is through extended Bible study prayer in your small group, we become confident and comfortable that we know who we are and what we believe. I know what the gospel is. If somebody says, what do you Christians believe? Well, we believe the gospel. Well, that's a churchy word. What is that? Well, it's good news. The good news of what God has done and continues to do for us in Jesus Christ. Most especially to save us, et cetera, right? So I know God's story, the gospel story. I know the human story that, hey, we're all sinners in need of salvation. We all have a problem, and that problem ultimately is sin. Sin, death, and the devil. Sin and the consequences of sin. The good news is God has the solution to our problem in Jesus Christ, right? So I can, through some curriculums, I can learn to tell my story and rehearse my story, a time when Jesus became real to me. My earliest remembrance is when Jesus became real to me, a time when I knew for certain, at least at that moment, that holy mackerel, I'm a sinner, and I'm not, no matter how hard, I'm in bondage to sin and can't free myself. Those aren't just words. I'm stuck. But thanks be to God, I don't have to save myself. Not only can I not save myself, I don't have to, because God in Christ has done that for me, and he's offering to do that. So I can tell stories of when the faith became real to me and God answered prayers and so forth. I know God's story and where to find it in the Bible, key passages, even invest the time and effort to memorize some passages, some key verses, so that in time, no matter what curriculum you're using, the bottom line, at least as I've observed it is, again, I just found these two C words I liked all of a sudden. I'm comfortable and confident that I can tell God's story, I can tell my story, and I can tell where God's story intersects my story. And if I'm standing in line at the grocery store or waiting for the elevator at the hospital or something and strike up a conversation, I'm able to talk about Jesus. If the Holy Spirit prompts me and the situation is right, whatever, I can do it. And that's what we're called to do, is, what is our mission? But to make disciples for Christ. And so the verbiage that I've kind of been trying to start using now, as we are striving to be a disciple-making denomination, have disciple-making pastors and disciple-making congregations and so forth, is that for me, like my vision is, or our vision could be, not just, my vision is to be a disciple of Christ who makes disciples for Christ, which is what I had used in some congregations. We had set that as our vision. Hey, I want to be a disciple who makes disciples, right? But now I've learned that we need to modify, at least I need to modify it. I want to be a disciple of Jesus Christ who makes disciple-making disciples for Christ, right? So that we're not just having people that God, by the grace of God and his awesome power, uses us to help lead someone to Christ, or uses us to as an instrument for the Spirit to get into somebody else's life and so forth. But we are intentional about helping them not only be saved, but become disciple makers themselves. So that took longer than I expected. Okay, sorry. I don't know how much time you want me to use, Lee. Everybody asleep yet? But the story then, what am I basing all this on is, one of my stories is I went to one of the early mission festivals in the NALC in the early days, and this guy named Ray Sheck and Valerie Hobbs were doing a workshop on disciple making, and I went to that workshop, and this is like probably 10 years ago, 8, 9, 10 years ago, and I was very impressed with what I was hearing, and flagged Ray down afterwards, said, hey, you want to have lunch? And he did, and it was hard to get him to talk, if you know Ray. He had nothing to, you know Ray, yeah, it was not hard. It's hard to get, no, I'm kidding. Ray, are you listening? No, sorry. But Ray was very gracious, and in a nutshell, he began to coach me, so he started calling me. We'd have telephone calls every couple of weeks for a long time, and Valerie put me on to some marvelous curriculum that was real helpful to me as I'm getting into this, the 2-7 series curriculum, which that's one that's very effective in my experience thus far. And then I ended up, as I led that, it changed my life. I mean, as a pastor, I was getting ready to head to retirement, and was kind of, I could have coasted retirement almost if I wanted to, and was wondering about that, and I got involved in this whole disciple making thing, and it like re-energized me, it reinvigorated my ministry and stuff, and then I ended up feeling called to go to South Carolina, and so I went to St. Peter's in South Carolina about 7 years ago, and told them in the interviews and stuff, if you call me here, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to try to pursue this disciple making stuff, and they said sure. And so as Ray helped me get started, I ended up in my situation feeling it led and it would be helpful to be coached by an official navigator. So Ray was great with that and blessed me to do that, and I did. And so we set up I went through that kind of coaching, and it was very helpful to me, helped me get direction and so forth. And then we set up a leadership team, and I led them through the 2-7 series, and then we started doing other books, and to sit back and see a group of people, see their lives change, this team of about 5 folks, and their lives were absolutely transformed over that time. And then they all went out and they've started small groups, and they're leading others, and those people are getting ready to start or have started some small groups, and COVID came right in the middle of it and derailed the whole thing for almost 2 years, but we picked it back up, and they have a very exciting disciple making ministry that's in place right now, and God's doing incredible things through it. And so I was very, in some ways, disappointed that I had to retire. I guess as most folks know, I've got cancer, and my cancer took a turn for the worse last year, so I had to resign. I retired earlier than I intended to, but I feel that the disciple making ministry was in place, that God's taken it and running with it. So yeah, so that's just, I literally have done the thing of starting out from the very beginning of the congregation, started with a handful of people, and now there are probably 20 people whose lives are totally transformed, and they will talk about their faith, they'll pray out loud, they'll lead Bible studies, they're inviting other people to consider doing it too, and it's just exciting to see that happen. So I commend that to you. That's kind of part of my story. And I guess I could also say that because I was involved in that, got involved in that at the time when I did, I was invited to be a part of the Life to Life team. So I got to work with Dave Keener and that team that produced this book. So folks are just now starting to use it, and gotten some good feedback from a couple pastors in North Carolina already that this, just using this manual, doing what it says is helping in small groups. They're getting faith conversations, faith discussions going, and people are talking about their faith, and it's really leading to some great things. So I commend that to you. Maybe the last thing I'll say, Lee, is Famous last words for a preacher, right? 20 minutes later. But the last thing I'll say about it is, yes, it's like a lot of pages if you try to print it out, but it is free to download it. So if you download it, just leave it on your computer. You just look on your screen. If you've got a small group, everybody's got a laptop or an iPad or something, you can download it. Nobody has to spend any money for anything. And then you got those videos on there. So it's, I think the team really did a good job with that. So I commend that to your consideration as well. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. We even thought about putting in a flash drive.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay, just to kind of wrap things up, where do we go from here? On November 5th, which is a Saturday, from 10:30 to 11:30, there's going to be GoToMeeting available to everybody, and we're going to be sending out a notice early next week giving the details of it. But there'll be at least 5 attendees who have participated in this program to some extent, who will be able to share experiences like Pastor just did about what they've experienced working in small groups, and there'll be a lot of opportunity to ask questions and get your questions answered. So again, there's going to be a session on November 5th from 10:30 to 11:30. The details will come out in an email in the next few days telling you how you can sign up for it, and it's just going to be through GoToMeeting. I think we've used up our time. Do we have time for a couple of questions now?
I think maybe what we can do is you guys are going to be around. People who have questions can talk to you as they see you.
Okay,
I'd rather do it that way.
that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So thanks to Lee, to Brian for taking it over, and Judy and the whole crew, and to Bill for the sharing as well. This is to be a major, or the major priority of the North American Lutheran Church. And I would urge you to do that. I would like Pastor Dan Schaefer to come up here and maybe introduce Officer Dan Schaefer. I don't know, do you know him well enough to introduce him? Okay. I appreciate those who are serving. This is a time when I really would not want to be in law enforcement, given the popular attitude. And I know where I'm interim, we just had a very positive experience where there was a very troubled woman and frankly demonic aspects. And I was so impressed with the police officer from Montoursville, Pennsylvania. Caring. We found out the next Sunday he was sitting in his car outside the church, making sure there'd be no problem. And a number of weeks later, people followed his advice. I don't know that the woman is in a position to accept the help, but it was the compassionate care. And, we need to be prepared in all of our churches for dealing with problems. So, Dan, introduce Dan.
Okay. Well, it's a real pleasure and honor to introduce my son, Dan Jr., and give his presentation on the Church Emergency Handbook. He's got quite a resume in law enforcement and also education, and recently got his master's and published the Church Emergency Handbook. And in our region council meetings, we talk about having a presentation, because as many of us realize, in every church around the world today, literally, anything can happen anywhere. And I've been one of those pastors over the years that said, oh, that'll never happen here. Oh, we don't have to worry about that. But as we talked about those things, it came to the fore that should happen. Well, as it says in the foreword that you can read there, Dan was the kid in church who, shoveled the snow, lit the candles, set up tables and chairs. Every once in a while he shows up at church where I'm at now, and I'll say, for old time's sake, you want to set up some tables and chairs just for fun? Because he was there all the time. He was that kid, but he really has a heart for the Lord, and he has a heart for the church, and he followed in his grandfather's footsteps to be a policeman, not his father's to be a pastor. But he's probably a little bit of both, really, in the work he does, like Steve alluded to, because, you know, he's in church every Sunday with his wife and 3 kids. And so I could go on and on, bragging about Dan and telling you all kinds of great stories, and he'd say, "Oh no, Dad, you're not going to tell that again, are you?" You know, and then don't get me started on his kids, our grandkids, because that would really take up a lot of time. But if you would, please welcome Dan to the podium to share his presentation.
Thanks, Dad. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. We're going to try to get things set up quickly with the PowerPoint so everyone can follow along. So that should be on the thumb drive as NALC presentation.
Does everybody have their handout, Church Emergency Handbook Assessment? Who needs one? If you need one, raise your hand.
So we're going to use the assessment as a bit of an outline for what we're going to go over today. We'll fill in some of the gaps. Okay. So as Pastor Dan Schaefer said, you know, I grew up as a pastor's son. We lived all over the world. We served as missionaries in Madagascar and France. And then for the longest time, Dad was a pastor in Ohio, where I was growing up. So I've heard about every pastor joke that a pastor can say. And I may be taking a little liberty in a room full of pastors, but I heard of a pastor the other day who was out doing some calling on some homebound members of the church, and the pastor fell into some quicksand. And being a man of faith, when the fire department arrived to perform a rescue and get him out of the quicksand, he said, "No, God will save me. I'm good. They said, "Okay." So they left. About an hour later, they came back to check on him, just doing their due diligence. Pastor was still there in the quicksand, and he's been a little bit more than he was the first time they were there. He said, "No, I'm good. God will save me." "Okay, Pastor." They leave. Come back a little bit later. Pastor's up to his neck in quicksand. He says, "Fellas, I'm good. God will save me." Well, you kind of see where this is headed. The quicksand took the pastor, and he shows up at the pearly gates. And he says, "God, why didn't you save me?" And God said, "Who do you think called the fire department?" So there's definitely a mix of, we have our faith in the Lord. We also want to be good stewards of what we have, and we want to take care of the members of our churches. And that's really where we're at today. So I'm very, very grateful that the NALC, Atlantic Mission Region, would invite me to come speak to you. In my experience in the police department, for years we did assessments of churches in our area. And sometimes it can be difficult for a church to realize that they need to do this. So you are ahead of the game, looking at what you need to do and what we can do together to help get churches prepared. Because ultimately, what we're looking at today is a world where there's dangers everywhere. We want to make sure that when we are in church, we're here and we're safe. So that's really our focus. So as we get ready to go here, there we go. Success. All right, looks good. So everyone, I believe every congregation received a copy of the handbook. We're going to just go through some of the wave tops on that to help you get ready. And I would like to say there are lots of dangers in this world. There are lots of ideas of what we can do to be prepared. So these are based on my experiences as a police officer for 22 years, with experience on the SWAT team, with experience in municipal emergency management, also with, I have a graduate degree in emergency management. But there's really no way to be 100% prepared. We want to do the best we can, we want to mitigate the risks that we can, but there could always be something down the road, and that's why we're here. That's why we have faith and we trust in the Lord. So if we can go to the first slide. There we go. So we'll talk about the fundamental steps of how we want to get this process started in a congregation. And churches love committees. Pastors love committee night. They love church council meetings. Well, sorry. But this really does, in my opinion, if you're going to start looking at a safety team or an emergency management committee, it needs to be its own committee. So we want to take people who are interested in this. We don't want to add too many additional duties to our properties committee or our outreach committees. We want to use people who have a spirit for this type of service. So we want to get our committee together. We want to assess the hazards and risks in our area. We want to look at your congregation, your building, the neighborhood that it's in. What are the natural hazards around? What are the technological? Is there a nuclear power plant down the street? Those kinds of things. So we want to look at the hazards, and then we want to look at ways that we can mitigate those hazards. So if we mitigate a hazard, we're taking some of the risk and some of the exposure that we have, and we're limiting it. We're making things safer. If we're in a high crime area, we're going to look at maybe cameras or increased lighting, those kinds of things. For the problems that we can't really mitigate, we want to look at making a plan of how to respond to those problems. What are we going to do if something bad happens? Once we have our plans, we need to practice them. People need to know what the plan is. They need to know what to do in the event of an emergency. And we need to get everybody on the same page. And then in the event something bad happens, we have an emergency, we want to know how to, we want to implement our plan and put it into action. So we kind of have a step-by-step process that we're going to go through, and the assessment sheet is a driver of that discussion. So as we go through, you can take a look at that. So the first thing that we're going to do, if we can advance the slide, is we're going to form our committee. And I know the pastors in the room saw that first box and thought, oh, one more committee. Well, if you have ever watched a press conference on a major event, we just had the hurricane in Florida. It's the governor, it's the mayor, it's the city council who is giving that information to the public. We really need the pastor and the council president to be part of these committees because they are important. People follow the leader. The pastor and the council president are the leaders of the congregation, and this really needs to be a top-down motivation. So if the committee puts together a plan and the pastor is uninterested or uninvolved, it's not ever going to happen because, as we can see here, today the pastors are generally leading the service. If something bad happens during the service, who is everyone looking to? Whoever is up here. So we really need to make sure that the pastors are a part of this process, they understand it, and that they will be able to implement it because we really need our pastors involved. So after 22 years of police work, I took an early retirement and I'm now a Homeland Security teacher at a vocational school. And every month we have fire drills. If I'm speaking and there's a fire drill going on, the students don't respond to the fire drill. They're listening to me. So this is why we really need to make sure our pastors are involved. Council president, very, very important to have the council president understanding what's going on, because they're going to be making decisions behind the scenes as well. Within your congregation, there are first responders. You have police officers, you have firefighters, you have EMTs, you have people who have an interest in these things and do it professionally. I would strongly encourage you to reach out to those people to be a part of this plan, to be a part of this committee. As a police officer myself, and I also am a volunteer firefighter, that's how I want to help the church. You'll find that a lot of your public safety people don't really want to get up and speak in front of everyone, or they won't want to do certain things. But this is a way that you can bring in your public safety members, put them to work, give them a purpose and a task in the church, and get them more involved. It benefits the church to have their expertise, and it benefits them to be part of the community. Veterans are a great resource to pull from for your committee as well. The military is experts. They are experts at planning, at preparing, at implementing, at operating in a stressful environment. Those are people that you're going to need to help you through a major event. I know we're down here in Annapolis, and the past couple times I've been down here, we went to some football games down at the Naval Academy, and it was great. Now that both of my older children are in the Army, I wasn't sure I would be allowed to come back in, but it's so far so good. In this area especially, you have a lot of people who have experience, they have a lot of knowledge, and they're going to be very helpful at helping you put together a plan. And the final group of people that can help you on your committee are your problem solvers. I'm sure everyone knows of that guy in the church who always has ideas. Hey, Pastor, we should really do this. Hey, Pastor, we should do this. What do you think of this? There's always someone with those ideas, and this is a place that you can put that person to work. Get those ideas flowing. You're going to need someone with some creativity. You're going to need enthusiasm and energy to get this going. And those are the people that you can draw from. All right, if we can switch to the next slide. It's important for your committee, once you've formed your committee, we want to make sure that we train them so that they understand some of the principles. There are some really good guidelines on how to put together plans, about how to respond for and prepare for emergencies. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, has numerous, I think they have several hundred online courses that you can take to help you get ready for an emergency. There's different blocks, and they're all free. There's classes on how to write emergency plans, how to do a continuity of operations plan, how to respond to an event, a mass casualty or an active shooter event in a public place. There's classes on cybersecurity, workplace security. There's all sorts of great resources. 100% free. You sign up, you can take the classes. They're not too difficult, and they'll give you some good knowledge. Some other courses that are important. We need to build up first aid and CPR training. You may even have someone in your congregation that could teach a class. We want to make sure that we are building out the capabilities of the congregation to take care of itself in the event of an emergency. CPR and first aid, very, very important. When I was impressed when I came in the church today, in the back by the coat rack, there's an AED and a first aid kit right there. There's a wheelchair if we needed to help get someone out of here or move someone around. These are little steps that can be taken that are going to help in the long run. We also need to look at an active shooter response or an active shooter or an active attacker plan. Right now, the government, Department of Homeland Security has videos on run, hide, fight. And we're going to try and play one of those if we can get all the tech working here today. But it's important to see these things. It's important to watch. It's important to have them in your mind. When something happens, we need to make sure that we are ready and that we have an idea of what we are going to do. We don't want to start making our plan when there is an intruder. We want to have these things ready beforehand. Okay, so let's talk about the types of plans. We can advance the slide, please. So there's two major types of plans that a church can use, and businesses use these a lot. The first is a continuity of operations plan. How do we maintain the services that we provide when there's a problem? A prime example of a continuity of operations plan and why we needed it was COVID. When the government locked us down, when we weren't allowed to go to church a couple of years ago, when we weren't allowed to leave our homes. I'm not sure how everyone else's experience was, but in Pennsylvania, we had 3 months where traffic was restricted on the roadways. People were told, stay in your house, don't come out. You're only allowed to drive if you have a legitimate reason to be out. Essential personnel only. We were checking, we were supposed to be checking stores to see if only essential stores were open. If non-essential stores were open, there was a proposed penalty for that. Fortunately, we didn't have to get too involved with that. But that really caused a problem for churches because we need to be together. That is the whole purpose of coming together as a congregation, to see each other, to worship together. And churches had to come up with a plan quickly of how are we going to do that? How are we going to maintain the congregational life? And the best solution at the time was Zoom. We have it on right now. This is, the kind of the new, I hate to say new normal, because I don't like that term. I would like us to go back to old normal. But if we can leverage technology to our advantage, we want to be able to do that. We want to take advantage of the benefits of living in the 21st century. So let's use it to our advantage on our terms. But we need to make sure that we're still providing the services. So a continuity of operations plan could include, what do we do if it's Saturday night and we're expecting a foot of snow on Sunday? How are we still going to maintain service? Are we going to cancel service and switch to online? How are we going to contact people and let them know that we're doing that? Communications is a big part of a continuity of operations plan. How do we let people know what we're doing, that we're implementing a new plan, or we're going to try something different? But if we talk about it before it happens, we're in a much better position to implement it when we need to. So that's the purpose of planning. Our other types of plans are emergency operations plans. The emergency has happened. How do we respond for it right now? If, while I'm speaking, the fire alarm goes off in this building, where are we going to go? Where are the exits? What is the congregation expected to do? And I see you all looking around. So we have exits at the front. We have an exit at the rear. There's a fire extinguisher out by the back door. These are things that we need to think about. Does your congregation know what they're going to do? Once this plan is written, how do we communicate the plan to the congregation? I know of a pastor in Birdsboro, Pennsylvania, who has the same last name as me, that had a fire drill at his church. These are little things that you can do. It may seem silly. Why would we have a fire drill? Well, because people don't know where to go. They're going to be waiting for the pastor to direct them. But maybe that's your plan. If I'm the pastor, I'm here, I know if the fire alarm goes off, I'm going to stand here and direct people out. What if you're not there that day? What if you are on vacation or you're at a conference? We need to have a plan. People need to know what to do. Another example would be a tornado. Is there a place to go in the church for a tornado? How do we implement these plans? So let's move on to the next slide. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. I know lunch is coming up, so I want to get I want to get through as much as we can and then have some time for questions as well. So if we're following in our assessment form, we have our church contact information. We want to make sure that we're understanding where we're located, who's in charge, and then we're going to start looking at our public safety contact information. Everyone here is from different states. Every state administers their law enforcement differently, their fire protection differently. Emergency medical services are different. Generally, 911 covers it all, but some parts of the country still don't have full 911 service. So we need to make sure we know who we are calling in the event of an emergency. You want to know your local first responders. Invite them into the church. Invite your police department to come do a walkthrough. Invite your fire department. In Pennsylvania, about 89 to 95% of fire departments are volunteers. They would be happy to come on a training night and do a walkthrough of your facility. That way they'll be familiar with it when there's an emergency. Reach out to them. It's also a great opportunity for them to meet the church. A lot of people are unsure of what goes on in church. They're scared of church. I know from my experience in my fire company, many of the members look at church as like, well, I don't know really what they do in there. I don't know what goes on. But if we can invite them in, now we're building a relationship with them. And maybe you'll start getting some members coming in. It's a good experience for both sides. It's also important for us to know who we are calling, for them to see us, to have a face to the 911 call that comes in, and for you to know them, to reach out to them in the community. You also may be surprised at how many of your members are first responders. And this is, again, a great time to reach out and to get information from them. So on the front page, you're looking at your, filling in who is your police department or sheriff's department, depending on which part of the country you're in. Fire service, emergency medical service. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. And then your local emergency management agency. That's a great resource for congregations who are setting this up. So the federal government, so FEMA and all of the state level emergency management agencies have a faith-based initiative office. So there are people in the Department of Homeland Security who focus just on houses of worship, churches, synagogues. There are resources there. There is grant money there. Your emergency management agency is your conduit to getting that information and getting some of that grant money and getting that assistance. That was our outreach where I worked. We had 5 synagogues, 2 rabbinical colleges, and 12 churches. The synagogues every year called our team in to assess their synagogue every year. And they used our information that we would assess them on to apply for grants. There is quite a bit of money out there from the federal government, from the states, if you want to bolster your safety and security in your church. So your emergency management agency is who can be your conduit for that. On the next page, we're going to list our committee members because we want to know who they are so that we are able to reach out to them, and it puts everyone on notice in the congregation as well as to who are the people who are looking out for this. Who is the resource I can turn to if I have a question or a problem? Section D of the sheet is just an overview of your building. It's kind of forcing you to walk around the building and look at just what you have. What are the spaces within your facility? What do we need to look for? And then who else is using the facility? Churches are very often used for community groups. When I was the scoutmaster of my son's Boy Scout troop, we met at a local church. The building was unlocked. all the time. They had a sexton who would lock it up at 9 o'clock every night. But all day, during the day, while the church was open, or while meetings could happen, the building was wide open and no one was there. I couldn't believe they did it, and nothing, thank the Lord, ever happened. But these are things you want to be aware of. Who is in your building, and do they know the plan? Do your community groups know who to call if there's a problem? That was one of the problems that we had. We needed maintenance one night for a water leak at the church, and we knew the pastor. She was great. But it would have been better to call the property committee or the sexton if we had had his number. So those are just things to look at. What are the risks in our facility? Who's meeting with us? Look at this is to add if you would like to add a overhead view like from Google Earth or Google Maps of your facility. What are the roads? The church that I attend now backs up to an interstate highway. That could be a problem if there's a major accident or a tanker truck overturns. Now we have this. That's something that we want to be on the lookout for. So zooming out and looking at an overhead shot of your facility can help you identify risks. Okay, so let's talk about the risks that we need to look out for. If we can advance the slide, please.
Dan,
Yes.
we wanted to let everybody know, you provided an electronic version of this document for us. Are we allowed to share?
Oh,
that?
absolutely. Please, that is yours to use.
Invent the wheel, you'll be able to use.
Yes, please
electronic-
disseminate. Yep.
Okay.
And there's a copy of it in the back of the book, and I'll give you my email if anyone needs another copy. I'd be happy to email it out. But yes, that sheet is definitely yours to use. Okay, so we're going to start looking at the hazards for the congregation itself. So first we have our natural and environmental hazards, our industrial hazards. So these are things that are outside of our control. It's based on where the church is geographically. Different parts of the country have different types of weather. We want to look at fire and arson. Fire is a serious problem for churches because most of them are not have sprinkler systems in them. They get grandfathered on a lot of fire inspections, which I did notice that Anne Arundel County here does inspect this building, so that's great. Most churches do not get inspected by a fire marshal. Medical emergencies, those are a hazard. We have, anytime we have a group of people together, we can have a medical emergency. That's going to be your number one issue, is someone having a medical emergency during service or at an event that you need to be prepared for. Physical security, very important. Churches attract a certain element. When I was writing the handbook, I set up a Google alert for burglaries and vandalism at churches across the country. So anytime there was a news article about a burglary or vandalism or something happening in a church, a theft at a church, it would send me an email and it would give me a digest. And I had to turn it off because there were so many. There is an element in our society that sees a church as a target, whether it's because they think there's the Holy Grail or some sort of artifact that they seek, or money, or there's a demonic influence that causes them to want to vandalize a church. We also saw this summer with the Jane's Revenge group vandalizing churches and vandalizing adoption centers. These are things that we have to be on the watch for. Cybersecurity is a major problem. When I was a detective, I was on a task force with the Secret Service and the postal inspectors for fraud. So we looked at identity crimes, we looked at account takeovers, we looked at people forging and counterfeiting money, forging and counterfeiting checks, all those things. We made all these arrests, and they ended up closing the task force down because everything had shifted to electronic. It's people outside of the country using our computers and using our financial records against us, and that is now how they're stealing. So we need to be very, very vigilant on cybersecurity threats, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then violence. Churches can definitely become a target for violence, whether it's a bomb threat, whether it's an active attacker, whether it is someone just waiting outside to ambush someone after an evening service. We have to be prepared for that, and we have to be aware of these problems. So let's talk about natural hazards first. If we can switch the slide. This picture, when I was putting this together, I was searching for flooded churches. And I don't know if you can see it in the back with this picture. This is a flooded out church, and these are all caskets that had floated up from the church's cemetery. Hopefully, everything went back into place. But we need to be very aware of our natural hazards. We're coming out of hurricane season right now. But throughout the country, flooding is your #1 natural hazard. As more and more neighborhoods are built, structures are built, water is being moved in different ways. Rivers are being channelized. In our area in southeastern Pennsylvania, there is hardly an open piece of ground left that they're not building a giant apartment complex. They have these really expensive, fancy apartments that people apparently want to live in. They're taking up every open space. So now there's nowhere for that water to drain. And there's regulations that they have to have catch basins and whatnot. But flooding is an increased risk the more that we urbanize our neighborhoods. And so we have to be really aware of that. FEMA has on their website, they have a flood map program that you can type in the address of your church, and then you can look and it'll show you where the flood zones are in relation to your church. That can help you get an idea of what you need to do. And it may, be a really good idea to get flood insurance if you can afford it. The different parts of the country, we have different weather patterns. In southeast Pennsylvania, we get a lot of rain after a hurricane. So a hurricane moves up the coast, we get a week's worth of rain, we get a lot of flooding. When we lived in Ohio, we had a lot of tornadoes. Tornadoes have come through it. There's actually increased tornadoes where we live now. These are things we need to be aware of. Look at your, every problem that affects your house and your neighborhood is going to affect your church. So what can we do to be safe while we're at church if it is tornado season and a tornado comes through, or we have a wind event, we get the wind shear coming through? We want to check and make sure that we are taking care of the building. This is where you need to work with the property committee, making sure gutters get cleaned. Very, very important. We're looking for dead trees on the property that aren't going to crash into the building if the wind picks up. Little things, little ways to mitigate the risk go a long way. They say that for every dollar spent in mitigation, it saves $7 in recovery. I think with inflation, that's probably gone up, and with supply chain and delays. So the more that we can do before an incident happens to get ready, the better off we'll be when something happens. Blizzards can be an issue. If you live up north, every once in a while it'll be a mild winter, and then we'll get 18 inches of snow. We want to make sure that we have a way to either cancel church for a blizzard or make sure that we have good snow removal so that when people come in, they're not slipping and falling on the ice. That's a huge issue. I was actually just talking to my class about that, and I said, when do you see all of the slip and fall commercials on TV? Every winter. All the attorneys know, people know, that's another risk that we can protect the church from, is making sure that we're not getting sued with these frivolous lawsuits. So natural hazards present an issue for us. There may not be a whole lot that we can do. It may be an issue of making sure we have insurance and making sure that if the weather is really bad, we switch to our alternative service plan from our continuity of operations plan. Another issue we have to think about are industrial hazards. We can switch slides. So the industrial hazards in our area, the biggest one is our church is within 4 miles of a nuclear power plant. Netflix put out that 3 Mile Island documentary earlier this year. It can be some scary stuff if something bad happens. Something we need to be aware of if there was a release and we are at church. What are we going to do? Are we going to stay in the church if we're given a shelter-in-place order? Are we able to do that? Do we have somewhere to go? Do we know that we need to turn off the HVAC system? We need to close all the windows and doors. Can we keep gases out? You know, and this would apply if you were close to a chemical plant or railroads. Your freight lines haul tons and tons of hazardous materials in bulk quantities. I don't know, every few months it seems like a train derails in like Oklahoma or Texas, and it's a massive hazmat scene. Imagine your church is within range of that, and the fire department comes on a Sunday morning and says, folks, we have a major incident, we need you to shelter in place, we need you to stay here. Are you able to sustain a few hours? Do you have some bottled water? Do you have some hygiene items? If people need to stay in the building, how long can we sustain them? Are we aware of those threats? Dams are another issue. A lot of our dams across the country have been looked at and they're aging. They need repairs. If your congregation is close to a dam, that's something that we want to look at. That's a technological hazard. Major roadways. As I said, my church backs up to an interstate highway. If a truck rolls over, if a fuel tanker rolls over, do we have a way to move to a safe place? Are we just even aware, is that even on our radar that something like that could happen? So the little things that we do, making sure we have a place to go, making sure that we have some bottled water, we have our first aid supplies. If we have to hang out at church, how are we going to do that? If the power goes out, what are we going to do? Usually there's candles, but now we also have a bit of a fire hazard, right? So we have to always be looking at all the interconnected pieces. So speaking of fire hazards, if we can move forward. Fires are a really tough problem to recover from. They really are dispiriting. They're sad. They have an effect not just on the building, but on the morale of your congregation. It's hard. Families, when they lose their house to a fire, it's a life-changing event. So what are the things that we can do to make our churches safer from fire? And if a fire occurs, how do we make sure we can get out without anyone getting hurt? Those are our two main goals. So of course, the first goal is life safety. So we want to make sure in the event of a fire, we are getting out of the building. We want to get everyone out. And that may be difficult because we have a group of people. Some people are more mobile than others. So we need to be ready to help move people out if necessary. We need to practice that with a fire drill. See what happens. Talk it through. Look at your facility. Do you have exit signs? This church is great. It has exit signs. A lot of churches don't. A church that I was a pastor at in Pennsylvania had, the sanctuary was on the second floor. It was the old design. So there really was only one way out of that church, and it was out the back. There was no fire escape door. There was a small door that led down to the sacristy, but there's no way that you're getting a lot of people out of there. We need to be able to get people out of the way of the fire, get them somewhere safe, and we need to look at, do they know where to go? Do we have our exits blocked? Do we have all of the, we go through this fire door, and is that the place that we leave all of the Christmas pageant supplies? The people have to walk through that. We did an assessment at a synagogue, and it was a neat old building that they had taken over. And so the area, the public areas and their sanctuary was about this size, and they had a fire door off to the side. So we said, okay, well, let's open the fire door. And we were pushing and pushing and pushing, and here it was screwed shut on the other side because it was a warehouse out back. And that door emptied into another space that was being rented out to someone to store all of their classic cars. So you have to make sure that your systems work. We need to make sure that we can actually get out if we need to. Fire alarms are very important, especially as Lutherans. We love to cook. We love our potlucks. We love having that congregational meeting and then going to the fellowship hall and eating. But do we have a fire alarm in there in case there's a problem, in case someone leaves the stove on with the beans and comes in to do their vote, and now we have a kitchen fire? Do we have at least smoke detectors in there? Sprinklers. Any new construction, it adds to the price. It's worth it for sprinklers. For the fire company, a neighboring fire company went through a paper warehouse fire. So they make boxes and packaging. Paper is on fire. This could be, the big one. The building was sprinklered. One sprinkler was able to contain the fire until they got there, and they could put it out with minimal damage. Probably the water from the sprinkler did more damage than the fire. But it's really important if you're building new construction, if you have a daycare nursery school attached to your church, these are areas that you really want to look at getting a sprinkler system. And then fire drills. I can't say it enough. If you can do fire drills, it will help you with every other problem that you have. When we start talking about run, hide, fight, running is the first step. Getting away from an active attacker is the first step. If we already know where to go because we've practiced it for a fire drill, we're already ahead of the game. One other note on fire risk. Churches can be targets for arson. There was a study done, it's an older study, it was from, I believe, 1998. There was a lot of church fires, and they looked at why are all these churches burning? And arson was a leading cause. And if you do a Google search or set up a Google alert, you will see they may not be burning the building down, but this is an issue that you need to be aware of, that arson can be used. It's a crime committed against the church, but there are people who will do that. The worst case scenario would be something like that happening while the building is occupied. That's a new trend, they call it using fire as a weapon. And it kind of started with 2020 with the George Floyd protests. A lot of police officers and the firefighters attached to them in some of the major cities were injured with fire being used as a weapon against them. The Molotov cocktails, all those things. So we would hate to have someone become inspired by that to do something to a church. So it's just something to be aware of, even if, as part of your security plan, making sure the church is well lit, that someone drives by from time to time. Okay, let's talk about medical emergencies. We can switch over. So like I said, this will be your number one emergency. I'm sure everyone here has seen a medical emergency happen at church. We have people with all sorts of medical conditions. It can happen to anyone. Our organist one time had an episode in church. You have to be ready. You have to be able to do CPR and first aid. Having an AED is a major, major lifesaver. The statistics show that having an AED within the first couple minutes of someone having a sudden cardiac arrest, the chances of them surviving are much greater than if it's applied later or not at all. So the first step is to get your members, at least your team, and anyone who's interested. A lot of people are required to get first aid and CPR training for work. If you can have an event and host an event at the church, to have a CPR and first aid instructor come in, turn it into a social event, turn it into have a worship service, make it a church-focused training. Bring people in, train your members in first aid and CPR. A lot of insurance companies will help you or provide discounts if you're buying an AED. The AED is a real lifesaver. As a police officer where I worked, we were responsible for going to all major medical incidents. So if the ambulance was dispatched for a cardiac emergency, they would also send a police officer because we could usually get there quicker. And one Sunday morning, a couple was in the Home Depot shopping. My husband said, "I don't feel so good. I have chest pains." Wife calls 911. I show up and I look at this gentleman and I'm like, this does not look good. So I had the AED with me. I had the first aid kit with me. And as I was standing there, he went into sudden cardiac arrest. And because I had everything right there, I was able to use the AED. It shocked him, and he came back. He survived that from that initial shock. EMS arrived, they transported him, he went into cardiac arrest 2 more times in the ambulance, but because we had started everything working, he ended up surviving. So having the ability to take care of your members, if someone has a cardiac arrest in church, it would be heartbreaking for someone to not survive because we didn't purchase an AED. We had a good friend at our old church, and he and I were those guys that I talked about at the beginning that had all sorts of great ideas. And our big idea was, we need an AED in this church. And sadly, he passed away of a cardiac arrest at home prior to the church getting the AED, but it was purchased in his honor, and it was really kind of a moving thing to think that a guy who thought so much about that would be able to have an AED purchased in his honor. So our medical emergencies, number one, we want to be concerned about a sudden cardiac arrest, but there are other issues that we could have as well, with the stroke, with the fall. Many churches have steps or old steps. Are we keeping the areas clean? Do we have ways? Do we have an elevator to help our members who aren't able to go up and down the steps easily? Do we have a way to help them up and down steps? No one's falling down steps. And then back to our potlucks. We have to be mindful of burns. We have to be mindful of the kids running around. We have a lot of big events. We have a lot of people around. Are we keeping the little ones away from the stove? And do we have something we can do to help them? Some first aid supplies if there was a burn. Okay, let's talk physical and cyber security. These two pieces go together pretty well because with our security plan, we want to protect what's inside the church, whether it's the people or the documents. Having a secure perimeter around our church, making sure that the property is well groomed and well maintained, is really important. There's a theory called crime prevention through environmental design. And what that means is the more intimidating, I don't want to say intimidating, the more professional your property looks, the better maintained it is, it will deter people from coming in because they see that someone cares. They see that someone's taking care of the building. We had repeated burglaries at a small church in an urban area where I worked because the church looked abandoned. And people would kick in the door and think that it was just a place they could squat, but it actually was an active church that just was not well maintained. it looked like an easy target. It looked like an easy place to get into, and they took advantage of that. That church, since then, has put up some gates. They've put up signs on the outer edge of their property saying no trespassing. They put up a chain. They chain across their parking lot at night so that no one goes in there and does anything. They put lights around the exterior. It looks like a place that people care about, which makes it a little bit of a harder looking target for someone who wants to commit a property crime. We want to have a visible deterrence. In the same way, we want to protect our electronic records. We want to put a wall around the important records that we keep. Everyone, churches all over, we're collecting checks on Sunday mornings. We're getting electronic records. My church, I can donate online. I can give my offering on an app on my phone. These are things that we want to make sure that if we're using them, they're secure, that you're using virus protection, that only the right people have access to these things within the church. If you're going to give someone access to the financial accounts, it may seem embarrassing to that person, but we might want to do a background check just to make sure that there's no issues with someone having information on the finances of the church. And the members. There's a theory, so when I did financial crimes, if someone has pressure, if they have an issue outside, a financial issue, and they have access to money, that can be an overwhelming temptation. We want to make sure that we don't put people into that position where they would be tempted. The other part of your electronic security is making sure that your church staff and anyone who has access to the church's computer system or network understands email safety and security. So we want to be on the lookout for those emails from people asking for money donations because they may be a scam. We want to make sure that we're checking to see that people are legitimate. We're looking at email headers. There's all sorts of easy online videos that you can watch, but having something like that before we give someone a username and password to get on the church's network is important because we don't want to fall victim to a ransomware attack, where now someone has given their username and password, or they've allowed an outside entity to have access to the network, and those people have locked your network, and they require a ransom to unlock it. So now all your records are gone. They're in the hands of these criminals, usually from outside of the U.S., who are going to demand money to give you back your records. So you want to make sure that you are training people who have access to the network to avoid those kinds of problems. So next, I want to talk about protection from violence, and then we can do some questions and answers. I'd like to try and play a video for you if I could. Two main things that we need to be aware of. Number one are bomb threats. Bomb threats are generally a passive-aggressive attack on a church. I've been to lots and lots of bomb threat calls. I have yet to see a bomb. Not to say that it doesn't happen or it couldn't happen, because it could. However, generally the goal of the person making the bomb threat is to intimidate, scare, and disrupt the congregation. So we need to have an idea for that. What do we do if we get a bomb threat? There's a bomb threat checklist, I believe it's in the manual, that you can copy and put next to the phone. It's a standard practice of, what information did this caller get? What number did they call from? What did their voice sound like? What did the connection sound like? Making a bomb threat is a crime. After you receive one, you need to call 911. You need to get law enforcement on scene and let them investigate. In 2018, there were hundreds of bomb threats. They all came over the fax machine in one day. I think there was like 5,000 across the country. We had a handful of them come through, and it turned out it was a hoax. The person was outside of the country sending these bomb threats over. But there was an investigation, And we, at the local level, contacted our federal partners at the ATF and the FBI, and they were able to investigate it and work with the other country to prosecute this person. It turned out it was a teenager in Israel sent out this bomb threat attack. So we just need to be aware of it. It needs to be on our radar. Probably the most scariest thing that could happen would be an active attack. When I wrote the handbook, I did a survey of pastors across the country and what they were most worried about. And it was, what do we do if there's an active attacker in the church? And that can be someone coming in with a knife, it could be someone ramming a vehicle into the sanctuary, it could be an active shooter. So do you think we can try playing the video? Okay, there's no, it's on the slideshow for avoid, deny, defend. Yeah, let's see if that'll work. So this is from Texas State University. They are the clearinghouse for all active attack incidents. They're a contractor. This may be a little startling. There's no blood, there's no gore, but this is to help you understand people's reaction to an active shooter event. Sounds like we're losing the sound a bit. The narrator's explaining that these things happen very quickly, and the quicker that we respond, the safer we'll be.
Always try to escape,
Okay.
even when it's instead. Really, but within. Remember,
We can pause it. I can explain.
leave off. But
So we have 3 courses of action that are preferred to be taken in the event of an active shooter or an active attacker. And those are run, hide, or fight. And they don't have to be used exclusively. So our first objective would be, in the event of an active attack, to get out of the way, get away from the attacker, to run. So we want to run, get out of the way, go. That's where our fire drill comes into play, because people will already know where they need to go in the event of an emergency. So we run. If we can't run, we hide. This open room, very tough to hide. So we may need to run, and we may need to go directly into the third option, which is fighting the attacker. There's ways to do that. There's always discussion on whether or not churches should have members that have concealed carry permits carry their guns in church. That's up to the individual congregation and the laws of the state in which you operate. What I would say is if you do use that as your plan, make sure that the person carrying the gun is able to use it safely and effectively, that they train, that they practice. Having the permit doesn't mean that you're automatically a good shot. Even police officers. So in my training as a trainer for the police department, I was in charge of the firearms training unit, and I was the lead sniper in charge of sniper training. We would train repeatedly. We trained a lot, and you would still see at times under a high level of stress, police officers don't always hit their target. I'm sure you've all seen on the news of an incident where police officers fired 40 rounds and maybe 10 rounds hit the intended target. In a high stress situation such as an active shooter, we need to make sure that we are using the right people to do that job. So running, yes.
Could you just, if you're allowed to,
Yeah.
if you're able to, if you're comfortable doing it, would you just tell the body what is going to happen if a uniformed officer arrives at the scene of an active shooter?
Yes.
What to expect them to do, if you're allowed permitted?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we want to run, hide, or fight. As we're doing that, we want to make sure someone is calling 911. Everyone can call 911, but we want to alert law enforcement as quickly as possible. When law enforcement arrives, it is going to be a very confusing and chaotic scene for them. Their first goal is to locate and eliminate the threat. So they're going to be looking for the shooter. This is where an issue can arise if you have an armed concealed carry permit person who has their gun out. You don't want them to be confused for the shooter, because the police are going to be looking for a person with a gun. They're going to have very, very limited information. Basically, what will happen where I worked is the alert tone will go and it would say, active shooter at this address. And maybe you would get more information, maybe you wouldn't. So we're going to be, the response is going to be very, very intense. Officers are going to come from all over. They're going to be looking for the shooter. They may come in one at a time. They may wait to form as a group and come in looking for the shooter. You don't want to be mistaken for the shooter. If you see the police, make sure your hands are empty and they are up. Listen to their directions. The first arriving officers are not going to show up and give first aid. They're not going to help anyone evacuate. Their job is to find the shooter, find the attacker. Once that person has either been taken into custody or that threat has been neutralized, then the officers are going to do a search looking for an additional shooter. They're still not going to be helping the wounded at that point. As more officers get there, once the scene has been cleared, that's when anyone who's wounded is going to be assisted. The first 10 minutes are going to be very, very chaotic. And it's something that we train for. Officers get, their adrenaline is going to be sky high. They're going to be looking for the threat. This is, every day that we went to work, we always thought, what's the worst thing that could happen today? Well, it would be either another 9/11 or an active shooter. So what are we going to do? How are we going to have ourselves? How are we going to be mentally prepared for that? And we practice, we train. In our area, we practice active shooter training at least once a year. And the officers qualified with their weapons twice a year. Some places don't train that much. We were kind of ahead. You would think it would be more. But it's going to be very chaotic, very stressful for the officers. So just remember, the officers are going to be issuing commands. Do what the officers say. Hands up and open. Am I missing anything, John?
No, I mean, I just wanted folks to understand
Yeah.
and appreciate those first 10 minutes, the weight is hitting the window, and
Yeah.
your first officers on the scene are going to be stepping over bodies
Yes.
and looking for the shooter to take him out.
Yeah, that is the goal. Now, once it's safe, or the threat is either contained, then we'll bring in EMS, and they will start a triage, they will start treating the wounded. There's a whole system called a rescue task force that we use, where we integrate police and paramedics together to do that kind of work. And every location is different. What I would say to you, going back to our very beginning, with knowing your first responders in your area, police departments are always looking for places to train. They are always looking for places to practice. Usually we train in schools. With the current political climate, some schools aren't letting police departments in to train on active shooter response in the schools. So if you have a facility that would be amenable to that, if you have a connection and a relationship with your police department, offer them your education wing, offer them your social hall. These spaces, the way, they're unique. Working through a church, trying to find a threat, trying to find a suspect would be a really good training experience for the officers. And for the training, usually there's, we use simunitions, it's a paintball type round, so nothing gets broken, nothing gets damaged. But it would be a really good outreach for the church to say, hey, if you're having trouble finding a place to train, come train with us, come train here. Build that relationship with your police department. If you have, just going back to your security, if you know there's a problem, if you're anticipating a problem, if you think that something happened and you think the church may be targeted, you can always contact your local police department to provide an extra patrol. Most departments, everywhere that I've worked, you can hire an off-duty officer to be at your location. If you have a high threat level, that's the best thing you can do. Because if you hire one police officer on overtime, that officer gets on his radio or her radio, and then you have all of them. It's the best way to get help. So my advice would be, if you have a major threat, talk to the local police, have an officer come in. When we had the synagogues would hire basically everyone that worked in the department. We would wear suits. Some of the guys would even put on a yarmulke. There's a lot of flexibility. You can ask an officer to stand by in the back of the church in a suit. It doesn't have to be a visible uniformed officer. So that's what I have for today. Doing this in an hour is tough. I tried to hit just some of the wave points. There's more information in the handbook that you've received. My email is up there. That's a Gmail account I use just for this stuff. Feel free to email me any questions that you might have. And I don't know if we have time before lunch. I don't want to ever, being a cop, you never get in the way of lunch. But if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or to later. Yes?
If you've got time. First thing I want to do is I went to Mary Cooker. Mary came out to my congregation right after a church shooting in Texas and did a day and a half's worth of active shooter training using Homeland and FEMA materials. That is a really useful thing, and thank you, and I hope you're still doing that. Oh, you what? Actually, you think I need this? Okay.
How are you on hitting that computer?
Oh, that's right, the live stream. Sorry about that, guys out there. The other thing is, our congregation is rural. And so it's the sheriff's department that covers us. They are in Loganville. And unless somebody's real close, it's the highway patrol, excuse me, they are 20 or 25 minutes away.
Yeah.
So we are on our own, at least probably for 10 to 15 minutes.
Sure.
I have real concern because we have an arrangement with the local elementary school. They are right across the street from us. It's a busy highway. They are to come to us if there's an active shooter situation. So I have a nightmare of seeing several hundred kids stream across the highway and into the church building with like 20 or 25 minutes before, if the school safety officer is not there, before anybody else is there. We have glass in front of our building. Those entrance doors, narthex doors, are glass. Beautiful, they're nice, they let in light, but they are also easy to get through, and you can see what's going on in the church. You got any, because we're in the process of writing our manual now. We waited until your book came out.
So my first advice would be, and I overlooked this when we were talking about active attack. When service starts, it is highly recommended that you lock the door to the church.
Oh, it'll be locked. The question is,
So during service, and that's for everyone across the board. Once service starts, have an usher near the door, but lock the door. That way, no one's coming in. In your case, I would look at, which state are you in?
here, Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. So the Pennsylvania.
Well, we're in Maryland now. I'm in Pennsylvania, guys.
So there's the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, PCCD, issues grants. So they have, I think, $5 million a year to dole out. I would look at, because a school is evacuating into your church, that would put you in a higher category to get some grant money to have a more secure entranceway. So things that you would want to look at are putting out some bollards ahead of the door so no one can drive through it. So there's something to block a vehicle from driving through your lobby doors. And then for the doors themselves, there's all sorts of options as far as just getting better glass security doors that have reinforcing rods in them. There's bulletproof glass doors. The school I work at, all the exterior doors have bulletproof glass. That's going to buy you time. Mm-hmm. No glass is ever going to stop every bullet. So as a police sniper, we tested our ability to shoot through glass in the event that we had a bank hold up. So there's imagine a bank teller being held hostage. Snipers have to intervene with lethal force on the hostage taker. And we were able to shoot through everything with the rounds that we had. There's special bullets that you can buy. So bulletproof glass is good for most threats, but it's not going to stop everything. And they're only rated to absorb so many bullets before they will break.
well, the other
But
thing,
it'll give you a delay.
right, the other thing I was wondering is just like screening it so whomever is trying to come in can't see within the church.
Right. So you could, like a solid door, but then you're going to want a way to see out, to see
Yeah.
what's going on. So, a solid door with like a Ring
Window.
doorbell camera or a security
Yeah, I think,
access door.
okay,
There are,
thank you.
yep. Yes?
So what did you say offers that grant money?
It's the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. It's PCCD. It's is part of the.
I'm going to give everybody about 5 more minutes for questions, if there's a couple more. Yeah, Laura?
I just wanted, can you address mentally ill or people behaving erratically? Not shooters, but, they may wander into your church. How do you train people to assess whether they need to be escorted out or whether they present a danger to people around them?
So it's hard to know for sure what someone's going to do. But if someone is disruptive, if someone is causing a problem, or you think there could be an issue. So the church is open to the public to come in, but it's not open to the public to disrupt. It is private property. You are allowed to ask people to leave. If someone comes in and they, let's say you had a protester come in, you can tell a protester to leave. Say, listen, you're welcome to join us for church. If you're going to disrupt, we're going to ask you to leave. And if they don't leave, call the law enforcement. Have them come out, and they will assess the person. I would be leery of using volunteers or ushers to try and force someone out to grab someone. It might be better to just move people away from them, maybe wait, kind of isolate them so that they're not, because you would hate to see, I've seen people become very unpredictable, where if they're there, let the police go hands-on. You don't want to put someone at risk. You don't want one of your people getting hurt or making the situation worse. If we can just take a break and have everybody leave, and we leave a couple people to keep an eye on this person, and then we resume after the police arrive. Yes?
Wait a minute, Dave. Wait a minute, here, Jeff.
Last year, we had a disturbed individual who was targeting one of our members. We didn't know that at the time, but he was stealing things and being disruptive. And we had the local police, we hired off-duty officers, and they put more patrols on that. And when they actually, one of those officers arrested the individual, we didn't have to press charges because they already had so many charges ahead them that,
Right.
you know, he went straight to jail and then, you know, whatever facility was
Yeah.
necessary. But our local department worked very well with us.
That's great, and that's if you can build that relationship, if they get to know you, that really is helpful.
Yeah, follow the advice of the police officer, because we had a similar situation at Montoursville, and they had us, you know, file the charges initially and get a notice out that the person was not allowed in the building. And I think it took, I mean, what was it, 3 or 5 police officers to control the individual? It made newspaper. Okay, we'll go with Marion, and then I'll go with Judy.
Just a comment on that experience is most of the congregation did not know.
Yeah.
And I think keeping it tight to a couple people who can manage an emotionally disturbed person at some level is very key.
Okay, I think I'm gonna, Judy, I'll let you be the last one.
You have an active shooter walk in and you have no place to run. What do? You drop?
So if we have nowhere to run, an active shooter were to walk in right now and we really can't get out, we want to then fight that active shooter. So things that we could use as a weapon would be a fire extinguisher is very good. If you can spray a chemical fire extinguisher in their face. What do? So, yeah, you have the hymnals. So,
Chair.
So playing dead has been shown to not be an effective tactic. You hide until you can move. So they did a study of the Virginia Tech shooting, and the people who played dead ended up getting shot. So that was not a good survival strategy. But if something happens, if we hide for a moment, look for an opening, and then try to run, that would be it. Or hide, and if we can't hide anymore, instead of laying there hiding, we try and disrupt the shooter as much as possible. That would be the best. Fight for your life. You have a right to defend yourself and fight for your life.
Okay, Brett, I think I'm gonna just hold off here.
It's not a question, just a comment. We're doing active training and stuff like that at our church. The guy who works with us he's a congregation member, works for the CSA and the FBI and a bunch of groups. Throwing the hymnals at someone lowers the percentage, they miss 80% of their shots that way.
Yeah, right. Okay, he's saying throwing the hymnal, you know, since you don't have the microphone, throwing the hymnals at somebody can just make them miss, you know, disrupting. Dan, do we owe you some donuts now?
Yeah, please. No powdered sugar, though.
I had to do a donut job for a cop.
I was waiting.
Yeah. I mean, you got to do it. Dan, thank you. This was wonderful. I assume you're going to be around through lunch if people want to talk to you.
I will, absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, I've had about 3 active shooter trainings, different organizations and stuff. I mean, you can talk. We had hospital security from New York Hospital come in and do it at a church. We had our local police department do it once. You know, I really would recommend that every church should do it one way or another. So thank you. What I'm going to ask us to do, since this is lunchtime, does everybody know that be present? What are you going to say, Kathy?
2 things. Dan, how much is the book?
The book for the NLC was $15.
15.
15. Okay, we do have
1
some
5.
extras that we bought extras that we can always replace. So I know people have been asking for that, so just see
Yeah.
Robin and I.
Okay.
And I also have the offering report. Do you want that here or over there?
Why don't you give it over there when they're there? But I will say this. If you are leaving early, Robin has arranged that Dan will haunt you, and we know where you live, and he will collect your name badge if you don't leave it. So leave it right on the registration desk.
On the registration table, you can take your little card out if you want to take it home, but I want the lanyard back.
Yeah, Jeff Morlock, since you made him a doctor, definitely wants to do it. Okay, do people here know be present at our table, Lord? May strengthen for thy service be. So let's stand. Be present at our table, Lord. Be here and everywhere adored. These mercies bless and grant that we may strengthen for our service be. Lunchtime, and then follow the schedule. I think we're due back here with Bill White.
No, it's all over there.
It's all over there. It's over there. I had to read the schedule then, yes. In the gym. So eat and then we'll have Bill.